Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where we exclusively look at 3D Blu-rays, not to review the film but to almost entirely focus on the quality of the 3D on offer, with just a short comment at the end about the film itself. And today we're looking at something called Spiders, a 2013 film with a fairly self-explanatory title. This was another one of those films that a lot of us would never have heard of if it hadn't kept appearing on lists of films shot in native 3D, which for a time always suggested that this might mean a superior 3D experience to those post-converted efforts. I'm at least speaking for myself here because I confess I used to be a native 3D snob and quite shamefully always thought that native meant better than converted no matter what. So I'm sure you can guess where this one's going. Anyway, there is some promising stuff at the start with a solid looking space station which is a perfectly okay piece of 3D, and this view is just before things go horribly wrong with a big digital smash which causes a nice screen filling shot of debris which is pretty good too. Although just before this, in the same opening sequence, things weren't so good, as I don't know if you can see the little spider there at the top of the frame, but he seems to have his placement in the frame inverted. It's odd, everything else looks like the 3D is the correct way around, but for some reason the spider looks the wrong way around. And then there is a pretty good shot for a film like this, and by that I mean, and I don't think I mentioned it, this film is distinctly low budget, but the shot's pretty good as the camera pulls back out of the space station's window, although in doing so it reveals a completely two-dimensional view of the place. So with some good and some bad in the opening shot, I wasn't sure which way this one was going to go. Then as we move to New York, there's a rather brilliant hyper-stereo shot of Manhattan, and I admit to being a bit biased here as this is my favourite type of 3D, and this one's really nice. Then there's the almost always good top-down view, and it's another shot with a wide stereo base, so it's also a very satisfying piece of 3D. And they got me on side at this point, and all the more so when we get another really good hyper of the elevated railway with an OK CG fireball streaking across the sky in the background. So it seems like it pays off to look at these lists of natively shot films, as there's gold to be found even in the really low budget sector, and Spiders was serving up some solid 3D action here. Sadly though, I soon found out that this movie had set a bit of a trap, using its best 3D up front, and I'd been caught up in its web, because from here on in things got really weak on the 3D side of things. There did seem to be quite a bit of effort with some of the compositions. Many of these looked like they could have been set up to maximise the 3D effect. I'd say this shot has fairly classic foreground, middle ground and background, and it's smart enough to have a barrier there that you can see through, so it ought to look great, and there's a variation of that theme here with the barbed wire hanging down. I think this is good 3D composition, and also it's stuff that would tend to look a lot better shot natively than post-converted because of the complexity of both of the barriers. But for whatever the reason, the stereo camera rig just wasn't capturing it. A large majority of the shots in the film lack much in the way of 3D space, and so objects have really little solidity or separation, and it's all a bit poor really. As well as being very weak 3D, there are lots of problems associated with shooting natively, like reflection conflicts which cropped up quite a lot, and this wasn't helped by the two leads both having shiny dark hair, which was frequently black in one eye and bright in the other. And the guy, by the way, is Patrick Muldoon, who was Xander in Starship Troopers, so he had a little bit of previous with giant arachnids. These reflection anomalies appeared in other ways too. There's this piece of red street furniture here which looks like they've carefully made sure it's in the foreground to give the 3D something to do in an otherwise fairly flat scene, but all it actually succeeds in doing is drawing attention to its reflection conflict in the glass on the front. It does kind of feel that their 3D camera might not have been at its optimum setting for some reason. I'm sure time was tight on a production like this, but compare this to something like Julia X, another low-budget natively shot film, and that looks fantastic in 3D in just about every shot, and you can't help wondering if the people working the 3D on this film maybe just weren't as experienced. And here's a weird shot. It looks almost entirely flat, as if they've shot it with a 2D camera, except there's a reflection conflict in the glass on the painting on the wall. I'm just not sure how they managed this. In other words, it seems to be clearly shot in 3D, but it looks entirely 2D. There's a similar sort of thing with these buildings. It looks like they've been shot with their standard 3D camera with its usual small interaxial setting, almost entirely ineffective at this distance, so it's not a hyper stereo shot like that lovely view of Manhattan from the beginning. So there's virtually no depth whatsoever, but they still manage to get loads of mismatched reflections. They're the experts, not me, but these just look like basic errors to me. Amongst all this frankly substandard 3D, there are the occasional moments where suddenly the 3D does come alive again, and it becomes readily apparent, like this view here of the fire escape, which is a nice location for 3D, and the depth is strong enough here for it to work. Or this view of the two lead characters amongst the boxes in the store, it looks a little bit hyper again, so it's an effective moment. There's some depth to this spider victim in the morgue too, so they do manage a few moments of reasonable 3D here and there every now and then. There are a few, but not as many as I think you could reasonably expect in this type of film. There are a few pop-out moments, like this shattered glass here, or there's this bit where the sparks fly out of the screen a little bit. They're both very brief, but they're both sort of okay moments of pop-out. Slightly more cheesy on that front, there's this scene where some bats come out of the screen. It's sort of okay, but like in so many films, it lets the pop-out moment only last for a few frames, so it's very difficult to really lock onto it and enjoy it. The other problem that they've got, and I'm sure they had some real headaches with this, is combining their digital effects with the live action. Often it works well enough. I don't mean that the CG is particularly brilliant, but it often does sit in the frame in a believable way. But some other times it doesn't sit quite so well, so the spiders here look a little bit off in terms of the space that they've been placed in. And in this shot, the rocks on the ground here look like they're hovering above it somewhere. Still, I think they hope you might not notice this, as you might be paying more attention to the spider's goofy grin. Very quick word on the film itself. It's a cheap giant spider movie, and that's about all there is to say, really. It's not very good, obviously, although to be fair, outside of the 3D, it doesn't look too bad considering the budget. And this isn't the same type of production as Sharknado. It's not an incompetent production. It's all put together like a real film, and I think if they'd been able to write some humour and wit into it, then maybe it could have been okay, but it does appear to take itself a bit more seriously than its budget and premise might deserve. Overall then, I see this as a classic example of how native 3D is no guarantee of good 3D, and I can't think of any example of proper, expensive, post-converted 3D from the last several years that's got 3D as weak as this one. I don't really recommend it. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking on this one. Cheers for now, bye-bye.